Welcome to Inside the Mavs, presented by Aura. My name is Kevin Gray, Mavericks pre- and post-game host on the Dallas Mavericks Radio Network. Appreciate you joining me here for the latest episode of Inside the Mavs. Make sure you download and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast for free. Give it a 5-star rating and write a review for it while you're there. And if you're watching this on my YouTube channel at Kevin Gray Sports, like and comment on the video and subscribe as well. And you can follow me on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports. Mavericks getting ready for Game 5 in the first round of the Western Conference playoffs with the Los Angeles Clippers on Wednesday night, with the series tied at 2 games apiece after the Clippers won 116 to 111 on Sunday after the Mavericks engaged in a furious 31-point comeback that saw them take the lead with just over 2 minutes left on a acrobatic Kyrie Irving layup. Unfortunately, though, Paul George and James Harden had the last laugh as they were able to help the Clippers outscore the Mavericks 12-6 in the final 2 minutes of the game, including a go-ahead three-pointer by Paul George in the right corner. Then James Harden got his floater game going in the fourth period late, helping the Clippers tie the series at 2 games apiece. Now a best of 3 as this team in the Mavericks tries to find a way to get a road win in Game 5. A lot coming out of that game, of course, being talked about with the amazing 31-point comeback that the Mavericks had in that game. They were down 55-24 with 5:43 left in the second quarter. Then Kyrie Irving turned it up, wound up scoring 40 points in the game, all of which coming after the first quarter. Luka Doncic did have a 29-point triple-double with 29, 10, and 10. But for the Mavericks, it was simply not enough. And for a team that's been shooting as poorly as they have, especially on wide open three-point shots, where in the playoffs so far, the Mavericks are the 5th worst team in the NBA playoffs shooting three-point percentage-wise on wide open three-pointers. They have got to find a way to be better from distance. And part of the reason why the Mavericks have been so successful throughout the course of the regular season was the increased percentage of Luka Doncic in terms of his three-point shooting. A guy who is shooting over 10 threes per game during the regular season, shooting at a 38-39% clip from 3, has struggled mightily so far in the first 4 games of this series. You take a look at the numbers for Dončić so far in the postseason. Yes, he is averaging 29 points against the Clippers in the first 4 games of the series, but he's only shooting 38.6% from the field and 26.5% from the three-point line. Conversely, his teammate and Kyrie Irving averaging nearly 29 points per game, shooting over 51% from the field and over 48.5% from the three-point line. And for the Mavericks, they have simply got to be better in terms of knocking down outside shots if they want to win this series. But the biggest concern going forward right now is the health of Luka Doncic, who right now, of course, is dealing with stiffness in that right knee, affecting his lateral ability on defense, his inability to hit consistent step backs, which we know that he's prolific at shooting at. You saw that in the course of Game 4, that the injury that he's dealing with is hampering him on both ends of the floor. And you saw that particularly with James Harden getting after him in the fourth quarter, where the Clippers, much like how they did in Game 1, was hunting Luka Doncic to try to get him on to James Harden, and they were allowing him to be able to be exploited time and time again, where the Mavericks, as Luka Doncic simply couldn't keep James Harden in front of him, not only with the injury that he was obviously dealing with, but of course having the 5 fouls and not wanting to foul out of the game to keep himself available. So for the Mavericks, they've got a real dilemma now moving forward for the final 3 games of this series, because if Luka Doncic can't be as healthy as he can for the final 3 games, it's going to put the Mavericks in a difficult position to be able to win this series. And the question that you and I may need to start asking now is, can the Mavericks and Kyrie Irving carry Luka Doncic versus vice versa? Because the way that Kyrie Irving's played so far, as you saw, especially in Game 4, he and his teammates are going to have to be the ones, it appears, to carry Luka Doncic. And you say, Kevin, how in the world can you come to the conclusion that the Mavericks teammates of Luka Doncic are going to have to be the ones to carry him? Let's think about it. Luka, of course, put together a 33-9-9 season this year, the first time we've ever seen that in NBA history. His usage rate, as it will always be, was in the top 3 of the NBA once again. But this is why you brought over a superstar teammate in Kyrie Irving, and why the supporting cast, much like how the Clippers supporting cast helped out James Harden and Paul George, who, yes, combined for 66 of the 116 points in Game 4, they were able to help out their two stars, Terrence Mann in double figures, Ivica Zubac and Norman Powell also in double figures. The Mavericks will need to get that kind of production from the others besides Kyrie Irving. PJ Washington, Derrick Jones Jr., and others are going to have to be better, and particularly for the rest of this series. And I'm talking about from a scoring standpoint, because Derrick Jones and also PJ Washington have done terrific jobs on the defensive end so far in this series for the most part, but it's going to have to be coming from the offense from Derrick Jones Jr., PJ Washington, and to a lesser degree with Josh Green and others to really be able to help Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving from a scoring standpoint. More on this when it comes to what needs to happen and how concerned we need to be about Luka Doncic and his health for the rest of this series. But before we get there, let's hear from today's sponsor of our video and our podcast, and let's hear from Aura. Today's video is brought to you by Aura. Do a Google search on your name and email address to see how much information comes up about you. I was devastated by the amount of information that I could be seeing searching my name and profile, and I knew then I needed to be protected for not just myself, but also for my family. Data brokers sell your information to scammers, spammers, and anyone else who may want to target you. Your full name, email, home address, health records, your relatives, it's all out there. That's why I've been using Aura, the sponsor of today's video. Aura shows me which data brokers are selling my information and automatically submits opt-out requests for me. Cleaning up my information not only helps reduce the amount of spam I get, but it protects me from hackers who could use this information to help them access my social media accounts, bank accounts, and other sensitive information. Aura also does so much more to protect me and my family from online threats that I can't see. It's really easy to set up, so I don't have to download several different apps to get things like antivirus, VPN, password management, parental controls, identity theft insurance, and more. I get everything at one affordable price. You may already have one of these tools already, but not having Aura is like locking the front door and leaving the back door wide open. Aura is always on, doing the hard work to protect me and my family so I can focus on other tasks with peace of mind. I value my privacy and I value yours. You can go to aura.com/Kevin Gray to start your 2-week free trial. Please see the link in the description. Back here on Inside the Mavs. Appreciate you hanging out with us through that quick break, and thank you to today's sponsor of our video and our podcast in Aura. Mavericks getting ready for Game 5 on Wednesday when they take on the Los Angeles Clippers in a pivotal Game 5 that could swing this series and who wins overall to advance in the NBA playoffs. And the health of Luka Doncic is going to be of chief concern. We'll have our game preview on Tuesday as Grant Assets will join me to get us ready for Game 5 on Wednesday. So programming note there when it comes to Inside the Mavs. Look out for our episode on Tuesday. And one of the things we'll continue to focus on as we do here in our conversation today is the fact that Luka Doncic, who played 45 minutes in Game 4, stating after the game that obviously that right leg is hurting him. And when you start to put the numbers to it by how ineffective he was, particularly on the defensive end, it becomes that much more alarming. Let's look at some of the numbers courtesy of ESPN Stats and Info. When you look at the research and what happened in Game 4, the Clippers were 8 of 15 from the floor with Dončić as the primary defender in Game 4 compared to 13 of 45 in the first 3 games of this series. Dončić was blown by on 12 of 15 drives he defended, according to Second Spectrum data. So a little bit of information gives us an idea of just how much this injury is affecting Luka Doncic and his ability to defend on the perimeter. And the Clippers were obviously able to take advantage of that. That 80% blow-by percentage, tied for the highest he's given up by a player, the highest given up by a player, I should say, who's defended at least 10 drives in a playoff game over the past 10 postseasons. So not great at all when you look at how ineffective Luka Doncic has been. And it's going to be up to Jason Kidd to really help his team, and particularly Luka Doncic on the defensive end, where we talked about in our last episode with Grant and myself about how the Mavericks didn't decide to put some size in the middle to be able to deal with what was the floater game of James Harden. Well, you say, Kevin, James Harden really had been great on his floater game throughout the course of the season. Well, I get that because James Harden during the regular season had only hit between 28 and 30% of his floaters. And of course, in game 4, you saw what he was able to do, going 5 of 6 in game 4, all within the final 5 minutes of the game. Luka Doncic had already picked up his 5th foul with 5 minutes and 55 seconds left in the game. So the Clippers having a really good understanding of, look, Luka Doncic is in foul trouble. He's dealing with a stiff right knee. Let's get him into action and having to deal with James Harden and exploiting him over and over and over again. And even James Harden, after the game, when he was talking with Lisa Salters on the post-game broadcast, he said, look, I know that the Mavericks are trying to make me go right. That's what they want me to do. But he was able to execute, and you give Harden credit for the ability to be able to knock down those shots when they needed him to do so most in the game. And, of course, Jason Kidd talking about after the game that, look, they were living with the idea of James Harden taking those floaters in the lane because of how poorly he had shot them throughout the course of the regular season, and they did not want James Harden and Paul George continuing to take the three-pointers that they did, because as you saw in the first half of game 4, the Clippers were making a barrage of three-pointers. In fact, finishing the game 18 of 29 from the three-point line at a 62% clip from three. So you could tell that the game plan in the second half was, look, run them off the three-point line because we can't have them devastating us from distance. Try to make them take more difficult shots in terms of the floaters that they were taking, but James Harden simply made them throughout the course of the game. But that continues to raise concern about what the Mavericks are going to have to do defensively. Dončić, of course, especially struggled guarding James Harden. As we look at the numbers there, 15 of his 33 points came in that fourth quarter. The 5 floaters, of course, that we've discussed him hitting in the lane. According to Second Spectrum data, Harden recorded a blow-by on 5 of the 6 drives defended by Luka Doncic. So again, not giving Dončić a lot of help from Jason Kidd in terms of how he could have maybe given a little bit more support to Dončić, who was dealing and continues to deal with that injury, and how that affected their ability to stop the Clippers in the fourth quarter. That's going to have to change, because what you saw in game 1 was a repeat of what you saw in game 4. The Clippers hunting and looking for Luka Doncic in those matchups, exploiting him with James Harden's ability to drive to the basket and be able to finish at the rim, and the Clippers being able to play off of that with other shooters being able to knock down shots, especially from distance, like they did in games 1 and most importantly in game 4 to tie the series at 2. What I want you to listen to real quick is this clip of Luka Doncic talking post-game about how he's feeling about his game in relation to Kyrie Irving and what that could mean for the rest of the series. Take a listen.
Yeah, I just gotta help him more. I feel like I'm letting him down, so I gotta be there. I gotta help him more. He's given everything that he has, and he's been amazing for us the whole series.
So Luka Doncic is feeling like he's letting Kyrie Irving down, and I don't think necessarily that he's doing that. He is doing everything that he possibly can in order to help this team win. But as we've discussed and will continue to discuss going into game 5 is, how will his teammates be able to carry him? And that's where the others, in terms of the supporting cast, will have to be much better. And more importantly, this coaching staff, led by Jason Kidd, will have to put this team in position to succeed. Because think about what we saw in games 2 and 3. The Mavericks were able to get the vertical game going with Daniel Gafford and Derek Lively to be able to finish at the rim and get easy buckets by turning the Clippers over as far as their abilities to get into passing lanes and get out in transition. That simply didn't happen for the most part in game 4. When you start looking at the numbers and how that went down in game 4, you saw that the Clippers were able to protect the ball much better in terms of their turnovers. They had the 13 turnovers versus the 19 that they had in the previous game. And for the Mavericks, they were only able to score 12 points off of those turnovers. Conversely, the Mavericks turned the ball over way too much with the 17 turnovers that they had that led to 23 points off of turnovers for the Los Angeles Clippers. So you've got to be able to execute in the half-court offense to get some easy buckets to be able to open things up. And then defensively, most importantly, you've got to find a way to defend the point of attack much better. And maybe going into Game 5, you will see more of Derrick Jones Jr., P.J. Washington at the point of attack. But even P.J. Washington was part of one of those blow-bys in the fourth quarter as well, as James Harden was able to get to the floater game and be able to knock one down after driving past P.J. Washington. So this was one of the things that I talked about coming into this series. Who was going to guard James Harden, and why James Harden I felt like was an X factor in this series. Because what you saw in Game 1 and then again in Game 4 with his ability to create off the dribble, knock down the step back three, and then taking advantage of a game plan that saw him go right, but able to finish and be able to knock down that floater in the middle of the lane constantly in crunch time. The Mavericks have got a real problem to deal with when it comes to Harden going into Game 5 and for the rest of the series, because we're not going to see Kawhi Leonard for the remainder of the series. It appears that the Clippers have decided to shut him down. They have shut him down, and we will not see him for the foreseeable future. And for the Clippers, they have played better when Kawhi Leonard has not been available. It's ironic that through the first 4 games of this series, in Games 1 and 4, the Clippers were able to win those games without Kawhi Leonard. In Games 2 and 3, the Mavericks were able to win both of those games. And a lot of the commentary from those who have jumped into my mentions or comments here on YouTube have been the Clippers get a little bit more bogged down, and the predictability of their offense becomes a little bit easier to figure out with Kawhi Leonard on the floor. With the Clippers not having Leonard on the floor, the ball tends to move better. The ball tends to swing, and guys are getting into their spots. And particularly James Harden being able to facilitate offense is now able to get Paul George involved, get his own offense going, and also other guys like Norman Powell who come off the bench, and also for Ivica Zubac who can establish himself in the paint to be able to make some things happen from a paint scoring standpoint, where the Clippers were able to outscore the Mavericks 46-42 in terms of points in the paint. Ivica Zubac in that game, when you look at how he was able to be much more effective, was able to have himself in the double figures when he had the 13 points that he had, going 6 of 11 from the field. So everything gets going much better when James Harden is facilitating this offense, and the Clippers kept their rotation short. In fact, in game number 4, they only played 8 guys as far as their 8-man rotation was concerned, with Norman Powell, Russell Westbrook, and Mason Plumlee coming off the bench for the Clippers. And for the Mavericks, they saw them play 10 guys in that game after their starting 5 who came off the bench. You had Maxi Kleber, Derek Lively, Josh Green, Jaden Hardy even got a couple of minutes, and Dante Exum played 2 minutes as well. But it's inexcusable as we go to the fourth quarter of that game, as we've talked about what the Mavericks did not do. You look at the combined minutes that Derek Lively and Daniel Gafford played. They played a combined 1 minute and 51 seconds in the fourth quarter. I understand you're keeping Maxi Kleber on the floor to stretch out the floor from a three-point standpoint, but he hasn't been taking a lot of shots in terms of not just overall in the series, but he also hasn't been making a lot of them either. So I'm not sure what the Mavericks continue to see in terms of that particular lineup with Maxi Kleber on the floor. Yes, with his ability to stretch the floor, but at the same time, not being effective in that role. And when you're seeing your defense repeatedly get bludgeoned in the middle in terms of guys driving into the middle of the paint with no resistance there, even JJ Redick made the point on his most recent podcast about how he was not thrilled that the Mavericks decided to not put in some more size to deal with the driving that Jason Kidd saw from James Harden getting into the middle of this defense. So even folks who were calling the game nationally, as JJ Redick was for ABC on Sunday, didn't like the idea that Kidd wasn't utilizing more of his length, especially with neither one of Derek Lively or Daniel Gafford into foul trouble. It was a missed opportunity for the Mavericks to maybe stop some of that bleeding. But again, going back to the numbers, the way that the Clippers were able to shoot the ball from the three-point line, Jason Kidd made the calculus that he could not live with the Clippers making three-pointers and would rather them get those twos. But at the same time, James Harden made those shots down the stretch. And that is part of what has made this series so intriguing. And James Harden talking about that throughout the course of this series as well, that you've got a ton of talent on both sides with Luka, Kyrie, Paul George, James Harden, before Kawhi Leonard got hurt. You had a lot of talent in this lineup for both of these teams. But the most concerning thing as we go forward here is how will the Mavericks continue to help Luka Doncic and potentially have to carry him throughout the rest of this series. You look at the final numbers from game number 4 from a three-point standpoint. Mavericks were just 11 of 33 from downtown. You've seen how much the Mavericks have struggled, particularly from 3. Luka Doncic in the game himself, just 1 of 9. We detailed earlier how poorly he's shooting from the three-point line. You saw Kyrie Irving go 6 of 12 from 3 at a 50% clip. Other guys are going to have to knock down shots. As I mentioned, Derrick Jones Jr. had a great game in game 4 with the 14 points that he had. He went 2 of 3. The Clippers are going to have to be made to be paid by the Mavericks' ability to knock down shots. Again, another key that I talked about coming into the series was the idea that the Mavericks were going to have to make the Clippers pay from the three-point line for leaving them wide open. And we detailed a little bit earlier in the show how the Mavericks are the 5th worst team in the postseason so far, shooting 30.2% on wide open three-point shots. That is simply not going to cut it. And if you're trying to win this series against a Clippers team that is the 6th best shooting team in the NBA from the three-point line at 38%, they were the 6th best team in the NBA this season in terms of field goal percentage with an offensive rating that got them to 4th in the league. You've got to be able to execute in terms of knocking down shots to help out your superstar who is clearly trying to put forward all of his effort on both ends of the floor, but simply his body is not allowing him to do that. And I don't know if the Mavericks for the rest of this series will be able to do enough, given the talent that the Clippers have, to be able to utilize what they have to carry Luka Doncic. Now, they're fortunate that they have a couple of days off to be able to get Luka Doncic some rest before having the tip-off at 9 o'clock on Wednesday. How much more rested will Luka be, and how much more effective can he be with some time off in order to be ready to play and to give the Mavericks what they will need from him in Game 5 to try and win that game before they come back for Game 6 on Friday night. That obviously remains to be seen, and we'll have more in terms of an update when it comes to Luka Doncic and his health on Tuesday. But for Mavericks fans who are concerned about what they saw in Game 4, there is real reason to be concerned due to not just the injury that Luka Doncic is dealing with right now, but how ineffective at times this team has been knocking down shots to be able to relieve some of that pressure off of him. Because if he's going to continue to play, you're going to continue to see him take those step back threes, try to get into the lane to be able to be the kind of scorer that he is. And one of the things that the Clippers have done in this series, they've made it difficult for Luka Doncic to be able to get to the rim. They're forcing him to take mid-range contested shots, and he's not able to knock down the shots at the efficiency rate that we've seen throughout the course of the season, where he put together one of the more historic offensive seasons in NBA history. So you give, again, the Clippers credit for making things difficult on Luka throughout the course of this series so far. But when you marry that with his injury that he's dealing with and the inefficiency that we've seen so far in this series, it is made for a disaster when it comes to the overall scoring for this team. And both teams in Game 4 put together their best offensive performances with the 116 points that we saw from the Clippers and the 111 that we saw from the Mavericks. The Mavericks shooting nearly 50% from the field themselves, but they also allowed the Clippers to shoot nearly 54% from the field themselves. And we talked about the whopping 62% that the Clippers shot from 3. But all in all, for the Dallas Mavericks, how healthy will Luka Doncic be will determine who wins this series. Because if he is not able to get back to the kind of form that we saw from him during the regular season, I don't care how much Kyrie Irving scores in terms of the 40 points that he had. I don't know if you're going to have enough from everyone else to be able to overcome the Clippers. But that's why we play the games. That's why we continue to see whether or not the Mavericks can find themselves being able to seal Game 5, because they have to win Game 5. I said at the beginning of the series that I would pick the Mavericks in 7. The way it has played out has been an absolute slugfest. The physicality has been extremely high. Tensions have been high in this series. the physicality taking a toll on both teams in terms of the injuries that they are dealing with. And most importantly, that will not stop as the series goes on either. And for Dončić, what that could mean for him is going to tell us a lot about who wins the series going forward. But for Jason Kidd, he is going to have to make the adjustment to provide some more help for Luka to be able to help him be able to deal with the perimeter scoring and driving abilities of guys like James Harden. And conversely, on the offensive end, the others are going to have to knock down shots. I'm talking about the Josh Greens of the world, the PJ Washingtons of the world, who just went 1 of 5 from the three-point line in game 4. All of these others are going to have to find a way to knock down shots to support Kyrie Irving. And for Irving, he's got to be much more aggressive at the beginning of the game. He talked about that during his post-game press conference on Sunday, being a better reader of the game to be able to understand that he may have to go a little bit early on, because that's another huge aspect of the series with Luka Doncic and his injury. How much more aggressive Kyrie Irving is going to have to be in order to put this team in position offensively to be able to be the aggressors like they were in games 2 and 3, to be able to sustain and help Luka through the course of 48 minutes, because the amount of minutes that Luka and Kyrie are going to play are not going to stop. You saw in game 4, Luka Doncic played 45 minutes. Kyrie Irving played 44 minutes. They're going to play a ton and the majority of basketball games throughout the course of this postseason because of how relied upon they are as far as their scoring is concerned. And for Kyrie, he's got to get off to quicker starts. Yes, he had the 40 points in the final 3 quarters of game 4, but he's got to be much more aggressive to be able to help take some of that scoring load off of Luka and some of that pressure off of him to have to generate all the offense, not just for himself, but also for his teammates. Because again, that is why you brought Kyrie Irving to this team, to be able to take off that load of Luka when it comes to difficult situations like this that the Mavericks are facing. Because right now it does not appear that the health of Luka Doncic will be at 100%, not just in this series, but even if the Mavericks get past the Clippers, what that does for the rest of this postseason and how he'll be able to effectively function is another story that we'll have to cross once they get there. But for the Mavericks, they are facing this 2-2 tie now with a chance, with a couple of days off, to be able to get as much rest as they can before they go to Los Angeles to have an opportunity to seize control of this series and give themselves to have a closeout game in their own building on Friday. And that is the biggest goal for this team, obviously, in game 5. Steal it in Los Angeles and then come back home to that raucous crowd that was absolutely fantastic in game 4, even when they were down by 31. The players talking about that, Luka talking about that after the game was over with, was the idea that this Mavericks crowd kept them in it even when they were down by 31. Kyrie Irving mentioning the same thing. Give yourself a chance in front of that AAC crowd on Friday night to potentially witness a closeout game for an opportunity to move on in the NBA playoffs. But all of these storylines continue to play themselves out. We'll have much more coverage when it comes to Luka Doncic and his injury, what that looks like, how much more he has hopefully progressed by the time we get to game 5, and we will see how that plays itself out by the time we get to Wednesday and beyond for the rest of this series. Game 5 will be on Wednesday night in Los Angeles at Crypto.com Arena, with tip-off at 9 p.m. as the Mavericks and the Clippers look to each take the pivotal game 5 of this series, the swing game, I think, in this series. And I believe whoever wins game 5 will win this series and move on to the NBA playoffs into the second round of the Western Conference semifinals. Still a lot to be decided for sure when it comes to the Mavericks and the Clippers. That'll do it for this episode of Inside the Mavs. Again, thank you so much for joining me here on this latest episode. Make sure you download and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast for free. Give it a 5-star rating. Write a review for it while you're there. And if you're watching this on my YouTube channel, like and comment on the video and subscribe to Kevin Gray Sports. Let me know how you're feeling about the Mavericks right now, tied at 2 games apiece, with Luka Doncic dealing with that injury and what that could mean for the rest of the series and into the postseason. Drop your comments in on the video as you watch it as well. My name is Kevin Gray, Mavericks pre- and post-game host on the Dallas Mavericks Radio Network. This has been Inside the Mavs, presented by Aura. Thank you for joining us. We'll talk to you later. Peace.